Yeah, boy, it's July 26th, and this is Slim at Slim for MVP, and I am here with my latest premium subscriber podcast. In this episode, we'd like to do a little RB tier analysis exercise. So I'm going to cover some buys and sells from tiers that we can create based solely on current average auction value. This way, I think you can get some names of some potential targets and maybe some players to avoid at a wide range of prices. So this could hopefully be useful when you're creating your budgets and looking at various price ranges that you're going to need to spend at in order to complete your roster. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for supporting us by purchasing a subscription, and hopefully your draft prep is going well so far. If you ever have any questions, like always, feel free to reach out via Twitter at Slim for MVP or to all of us at Fantasy Auction. So just before we get into this, I just want to go through again. So these tiers, they're not going to reflect my personal tiers. Personally, I don't like doing my tiers up until later on in the summer. So probably in August, I'll start actually building them, mainly just as a time saver because it saves you from having to go through and reorder players too often. I kind of like to wait until more to the last minute and throw them together once I've got as much information as I can possibly gather. Like I said, this is just going to be an exercise. We'll look at the average auction values from our website. If hopefully you've checked those out, whether you're mock drafting or actually getting ready to do your regular draft. They're updated every couple of days as we get more mock draft data. Thanks for everybody for sending stuff in. So yeah, we'll just kind of use those prices though to create some tiers. And again, this is based on a $200 budget in PPR leagues. We get that question a lot, what the budget is. It's very easy if you want to switch to a $200 or a $100 budget or 150. Just figure out the percentage, and it should roughly carry over into leagues that use something different than $200, which is usually the standard value. All right, with that being said, we can kind of start getting into this here. So here's tier one. I'll kind of just list the players in there and what price they're going for. And then we can talk about maybe some of them as buys or sells. So in tier one, we've got Todd Gurley at $65, Le'Veon Bell at $65, David Johnson at $61, Zeke at $61, and Alvin Kamara at $60. I think those are probably fairly, for sure, the top four in some particular order. Kamara seems to slot in there fifth, which, I don't think that's necessarily a stretch either. These guys more or less are the consensus top five in some particular order. So a buy I like in that group, and I guess before we get into this, all five of these guys are very good running backs. I think when we start trying to rank them, we're splitting hairs to some extent. But for me, one of the buys is Zeke, mainly because he's my RB2 and he's going for $4 cheaper than both Gurley and Le'Veon Bell. David Johnson to me is also a buy, again, for that exact same reason. He's going for cheaper than Gurley and Bell. I think both Zeke and DJ have overall RB1 upside in fantasy this year due to the volume that they're probably going to see. I think DJ has a slight little uptick in terms of the number of receptions he's going to get, obviously. But yeah, I think both are going to be used a ton this year. So if I can get any kind of discount at this position with my RB1, then I would take that. Kamara is obviously the cheapest at $60. I just don't necessarily see him as having the same upside as Zeke or DJ. So if I'm going to go with either of those three, DJ, Zeke, or Kamara, I will take DJ or Zeke, just because, like I said, I think they have that upside and Kamara doesn't, even though Kamara is cheap. I find I do get Kamara in a lot of spots, mainly because I want to spend a little bit less than the $65 and up. I mean, this is an average, so let's not forget. There's a lot of times where Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, Zeke even, they go over $65. They're going closer to 70 in some cases. So that's something you're going to have to watch out for in your draft. I think if I was going to sell one guy out of this tier, and again, I want to put some, like, all these guys I think are phenomenal talents, and I think they're going to be scoring a boatload of fantasy points. Would be Le'Veon Bell for me. I have him as the lowest in my rankings out of these kind of top four. Kamara outside of this. I think he's still awesome, but he's the most expensive guy often cases. And again, I would rather try and save a little bit of money if I can for production that I think is going to be on par, at least with what Le'Veon can do, and maybe exceed that as well. So we won't spend too much time on that tier. I think that's pretty cut and dry. There's not a lot. We know they're expensive. We know they're all good. I think everybody would be happy to have any one of those guys as their RB1 leaving their draft. So if we go into the second tier, we get Saquon Barkley at 55, Melvin Gordon at 50, Kareem Hunt at 50, Dalvin Cook at 49, and Leonard Fournette at $49. Here's where you start getting maybe a few more questions, and not a lot. I think, again, these 5 combined with the 5 from the previous tier make up essentially the consensus top 10 running backs right here in some particular order. You might have Dalvin Cook higher than some, but for right now, we're not really talking about ranking. We're just talking about based on price. But some buys, I like Melvin Gordon and I like Leonard Fournette. Mainly, again, because of their high usage or what projects to be high usage. You do run into questions of can their bodies hold up to the beating that they're going to take with this high usage. So there's always that concern. But with this usage, is there potential for top 5 running back output? Definitely. And they're going for, $10 less than the guys in the tier above. So that's something that maybe interests you. To me, Saquon here is the most expensive guy, but I feel like the Giants do seem committed to using him a lot. So he also has that high usage upside, it would seem right now. The 2 guys I'm selling from this group, and again, these guys are very talented. I would be fairly happy leaving my draft having one of these guys as my RB1. But Dalvin Cook is one. I think his price seems to be climbing. It wasn't that long ago where he was found in the mid 40s, and now you'll oftentimes see him going for over $50. And I think what's happening is with guys like Cook, with guys like Fournette, guys like Kareem Hunt, in drafts, the guys that missed out, the owners that missed out on the running backs from the top tier, they are looking, and we've talked about this on podcasts in the past if you followed us before, the running backs that are left out of this, call it the top 10, you're going to see their prices inflate a little bit as the names in those top 10 start to dwindle, because anybody who looks at their roster and realizes, ooh, I don't have a running back yet, and I want one of these top guys, they're going to be a little bit more desperate to pay up for some of the last remaining names. And I've seen Dalvin Cook's price move almost $5 up in average value in the last few weeks. So I think that's maybe a reason for that. Other questions I have, obviously, with Cook is his injury history. I mean, will he be able to hold up to what he is, what's being projected from the Vikings? Will the Vikings want to dial him back a little bit and use Latavius Murray a little bit more? If the Vikings are winning a lot in the fourth quarter, does Cook lose touches and they just put Murray on the field just to rest Cook? Does Murray vulture some touchdowns? Because I think he's shown to be successful at doing that in the past. So there's some question marks here with Cook. And if I'm getting him at the same price as all these other guys, then I would put him maybe on the lower end here. Another sell is Kareem Hunt. I think more or less it's just mainly because this offense or this team, Kansas City, is a popular regression candidate. We suspect their defense is going to be pretty bad, which might actually do some things positively for fantasy outlook if they get into shootouts. But I don't know if that means that Kareem Hunt is going to be used as much in that role or in situations like that. We saw Hunt pretty poor down the stretch last year in his last 5-6 games. I asked myself why, and I'm not really sure. Was it the defenses schemed differently just to try and stop him? And now with the rookie quarterback coming in, do defenses really load up on stopping the run or stopping Hunt and making a rookie quarterback beat them through the air? That could happen. Did he hit the rookie wall? If that's the case, then maybe it's not such a big deal. But again, I think there's some questions here. I think that he plays in a team, again, that looks like they could regress a little bit offensively, just because maybe they outkicked their coverage, so to speak, a little bit last year with how Alex Smith played. So again, questions, and if I'm getting him at the same price as all the other guys in this tier, I'd probably just fade him and opt for somebody else. All right, if we jump now to tier 3, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. It's gonna come down to personal preference now at this juncture of the draft when you get to these names. So tier 3 usually consists of Devonta Freeman at $39, LeSean McCoy at $35, Christian McCaffrey at $34, Jordan Howard at $31, and Jerick McKinnon at $29. So if I look at some buys and sells out of here, one buy, I suppose, would be Devonta Freeman, mainly just because he seems safe. If I miss out on those top 10 guys, and now I need to still get an RB1, I don't mind the idea of rostering Devonta Freeman, again, because I feel like he's safe. He'll be fairly consistent. And then going for more of a high upside, higher priced RB2, maybe pairing him with somebody like Jerick McKinnon, or if you look into tier 4 when we get there, there's some names down there that I like. But again, Freeman's safe. I think the offense didn't live up to expectations, I would say, last year. So I feel like they're going to revert back to the mean a little bit in terms of points scored. So that should bode well for Freeman. Freeman's price to me is a little bit high, $39. I'd love to get him for less than that. So that's something to watch in your draft. Christian McCaffrey for me is another buy at $34. We've heard reports just very recently when everybody reported to camp, he's bulked up a little bit. He added some weight. He looks bigger. Last year, he finished as a top 12 RB in PPR. So I feel confident that he should be right around here again. And if he can improve on anything from last year, whether it be, one of his weaknesses was his yards per carry running between the tackles. If he can score a couple more touchdowns, carve out even just a little bit bigger role. We've seen beat writers reporting and kind of this the preseason hype starting to build that the Panthers want to get him more involved, and which makes sense. He's an explosive weapon. Whether that actually happens or not, I'm not sure. But if you're buying him, at this RB12 price for a good price, I feel like he has a lot of room for you to get value if he exceeds that at all. So I feel like he's a fairly safe player to get in a spot like this. Another player I'm buying right now is Jerick McKinnon. If his price stays here, that's the one caveat I have here. He's still under $30. So I don't mind him if I can get him at that spot. And if I can get him for even less, that's great. I know earlier on in the season here, in the draft season, he was going for slightly above $20, which if I could get him there, I would be really happy with that. Yes, there's some risk here because we're not sure exactly how he's going to be used. There's a lot of signs that point to him being used in a variety of facets, which is good. We think he's going to be involved in the passing game, which is good in a PPR league. Smaller back. I don't know how many carries he's going to get between the tackles, game in and game out, but I think he should be used enough to be very fantasy viable. And I still think, even though his price is climbing, that there is, again, some room for him to outproduce this price. So as long as that is still there, then I will be looking at buying. One of the sells I have in this tier is LeSean McCoy. He's been more or less a sell for me throughout this offseason. Buffalo looks like they're going to be pretty bad. I don't know how many first downs they'll be making. I'm not sure how much time that offense will even spend on the field. We don't know what we're going to get from the quarterback position, really. It just might be a really poor year in terms of points scored from that offense. Now we run into this off the field trouble that's popping up. I have no idea what's going to come of that. Maybe nothing. But again, it's just another red flag now. If something ever does come up to that, that could spell a lot of games missed potentially at some point. I know last year we saw Zeke miss games for allegations alone. Nothing really ever was necessarily proven. That's the scary part of the NFL, is that sometimes they don't seem to even need concrete evidence. If they believe it to be true, then that's enough for them to suspend the player. So there's that kind of looming over his head still. And then obviously there's his age. We've seen him over the years battle some nagging injuries. He's not getting any younger. So can his body hold up this season? So again, for me, there's just too many red flags for me to pay anywhere near the $35 that he's going at. In fact, I have him right now. He's on my don't draft list at all. So he's going to be a player that I'm probably going to nominate somewhat early in my draft to just try and get him out there and let someone else burn up that part of their budget. Just to touch on Jordan Howard, he kind of falls in the middle for me. He's not really a strong buy or not really a strong sell. I don't mind him in the spot at $31. I think that's a pretty fair price, maybe a little overvalued. What worries me is not so much for Howard, but just the whole Bears team in general. There just seems to be a lot of hype coming right now about this team. The coaches are just trying to pump the tires of every single player on there. It just reeks to me a lot like what the Miami Dolphins always do, and again, I guess this kind of is one of the lessons. We need to just pump the brakes when we listen to the coaches talking, when we listen to beat writers talking, because those guys at this point of the year, that's what they're going to do, is just put out positive report after positive report, looking for clicks, looking to, spark interest in their team, trying to pump the tires of their players just to help their confidence probably. So there's just a lot of reasons to just be wary of a lot of this information. I mean, the newest thing out there is Jordan Howard should be catching a lot of passes. He's a very good pass catcher. Well, he has never shown that at any point really in his career, NFL or college. So I don't understand why the team would even think about doing that, especially when you have a player like Tariq Cohen out of the backfield who can be a very explosive pass catching playmaker. So whether they're going to try and force that square peg through the round hole, I'm not sure. I think it's just, again, another instance of people or coaches just trying to flood as much positive camp reports out there as they possibly can. So again, not a guy I'm really actively looking at buying, not someone I'm maybe selling. I'm kind of indifferent. What that probably is going to mean for me is that I probably just won't own him, though, because I'm not going to really go out of my way to get him. All right, jumping to the next tier, call this tier 4. Here we start getting into, start looking at some guys maybe with some more upside here, or with some interesting upside, we'll say. So tier 4 is Joe Mixon at $24, Kenyon Drake at $24, Derrick Henry at $23, Mark Ingram at $20, and Jay Ajayi at $18. This is a tier I actually find myself more or less avoiding altogether, with the exception of Joe Mixon. For me, he's the only real buy I have in this tier. I like his situation. That team should hopefully be improving somewhat. I don't think he has tons of competition other than Gio Bernard. And Gio Bernard, I think, is being completely overlooked at this point. So to me, he becomes an interesting flyer later in your draft. But I just think the Bengals are going to give Mixon every opportunity to try and earn a workhorse 3-down role. He struggled at times last year with doing that. But again, I think they're going to give him an opportunity again this year. And if he can do that, then obviously he's going to become very valuable, because these workhorses that can do it all obviously are going to score a lot of fantasy points. And I can't say that about anyone else in this tier, that they're going to have this same opportunity. So with all things considered, to me, he is the guy to buy in this tier at this price range. One of the guys I'm selling is Derrick Henry. To me, he's just too expensive at $23 for someone that's battling Dion Lewis, and that we don't even know how they're going to be used. Lots of reports that Dion Lewis is, going to end up outscoring Derrick Henry. The Titans themselves have said this is going to be pretty much a full-on running back by committee. Either way, it doesn't bode well for somebody like Henry to have any real RB1 upside. If I'm not getting that upside, then I don't want to buy him. Another guy I'm selling here is Kenyon Drake. He showed some flashes last year. To me, this comes down mostly to the Dolphins in general. I cannot trust this team. I don't trust this player either. I don't believe that he is capable of handling a huge workload. He seems too small, too skinny for me. And again, I think the team is going to be bad. I think the team has shown the ability over the last few years to not really know how to use players properly. I have zero trust in them actually doing that with Drake. So again, he's a guy that I'm pretty much just avoiding at this point. I'd have him as a sell. And some of these other guys, like you start having questions about, Mark Ingram. Obviously, there's Kamara there. So how much of a role is he actually going to command? And he's missing games. I personally don't ever like rostering players out of a draft that I know are going to be missing games due to suspension, unless I think of them as league winners. As an example, a few years ago when Le'Veon Bell was suspended, I got him at a fairly considerable discount in a draft. And my team was really, by the end of the year, my team was doing quite well. But Le'Veon Bell, we know, is a league-winning type of player. I'm not sure if Mark Ingram has that same. You can say the same thing about him when you have a running back that's going to command more touches than him already ahead of him. So he's a guy that I'm typically not really too high on buying. And Jay Ajayi is the other one. I don't mind Ajayi. I just don't know how much he's going to actually be used in Philly. Are they going to commit to use him, 70% of the time, 60% of the time? Are they going to run more of a committee? I'm not exactly sure yet. Until I know that, I'm not really looking at actively buying him either. So I guess the common theme when you start getting from me to this tier and beyond is upside. Where are you going to find upside? How likely are they going to hit on that upside? And this is where you have to start when you're building even your actual tiers, not even looking at price. Those are kind of the questions I ask myself when I start grouping players together in tiers. And I tier my players on what I expect to get from them in terms of fantasy production. So like I said, that's a common theme for me at this point. If we jump to the next tier, and I'll start by saying, to me, this is the tier that I think is going to win a lot of leagues. We'll call it tier 5. It's a fairly big tier because now the prices are starting to get a little more lumped together. And I'll call it the value tier. So we're looking at Rashad Penny at 17, Darius Geist at 16, Alex Collins at 16, Ronald Jones III at 11, Sony Michel at 11, Dion Lewis at 10, Royce Freeman at 10, and Lamar Miller at 10. So like I said, I call this the value tier. To me, there's lots of buys in here. Most of these guys in drafts I see going for under this price a lot of the time. And the very easy way, I think, to tell what's going to happen is track the prices of, especially the running backs, but all players in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds of your draft. If you see them going for higher than you would expect, then what this tells me is this tier right here, you're probably going to be able to get a lot of value. A lot of these guys are going to go for a lot less than what their average value is. So if I see that early, I might actually switch gears in draft, and I might actually pay up even a little bit more to get one of those big RB1s, knowing that in this tier right here, I'm going to build the rest of my running back roster just from here alone. So guys that I'm buying right now are Geist, Collins, and Penny. I think all three of these guys have high usage potential. I think Penny and Geist even have some 3-down potential. I think for a guy like Penny, I am going to watch at what happens in training camp. If you start seeing the Seahawks commit, and they've already said that right now Carson is going to be their starting running back. which is fine. You can put anybody at the top of your depth chart right now. Let's see at the end of the preseason who they still have up there. So if I'm a Penny, a guy that's targeting Penny, that's actually news I don't mind hearing, because I believe in Penny's talent. I believe in the draft capital that they spent on him, that they will want to play him. I think this will actually, news like this can help drive his price down. So that's a good thing for me. Dion Lewis, a guy that I'll be buying at $10 at that price. It's not hard to see him outproducing that $10 price tag at all. We know he's probably at least going to split carries with Derrick Henry. If you look at a lot of the metrics on sites like PFF, Dion Lewis was really, really good last year. So was Derrick Henry. But Dion Lewis was really good. So in the touches he's going to get, I expect him to be able to do a fair amount with them, especially behind a pretty solid offensive line. So again, for $10, very cheap to get a player like that. Lamar Miller, I like at his $10 price as well. Maybe not as much as these other guys, but he's a popular sleeper. D'Onta Foreman is, I don't think, going to be ready to start the season. He hasn't even really started. They haven't put him on the PUP list yet, but he hasn't really started doing tons of football-related activities where he's going to be capable of getting on the practice field with his teammates. So I feel like it's only a matter of time before they put him on that list. So I think Lamar Miller's not going to have much competition early on to start the season. And then you got a running back that's coming off a pretty significant injury that not many running backs have come back to 100% after an Achilles rupture. So Lamar Miller for this year might get a lot of touches with not a lot of competition. So again, at $10, I don't mind rolling the dice on a player like that. Royce Freeman, to me, he kind of falls into the Rashad Penny type of category. He's going for $10 right now. There was a report that came out that the Denver Broncos are going to want to go committee, and Devontae Booker is maybe leading the way right now. Again, that's all news I want to hear, because I believe Royce Freeman is the most talented running back on that roster. If this can drive his price down at all, I will be scooping him up anywhere I can. And with the confidence that I think by the end of the season, he's carved out a significant role, and maybe even a 3-down role. And I think there is, like I said, some 3-down potential on some of these guys where you'll be getting a guy for under $20 that is going to be producing or has the chance to put up low-end RB1 numbers here. So if that happens, I think, like I said, you're going to be in really good shape in your drafts at the end of the season. Two guys, I guess, actually, that I'm kind of selling in this group, even though I really do love this group. Sony Michel is one, mainly because I believe in Rex Burkhead. Burkhead was fairly successful last year, even though he missed a few games. And I just not really sure on how consistent Sony Michel is going to be. I feel like in this group, there's just going to be much more consistent options with some of the other running backs I've mentioned in this tier. Now, the other one I'm selling is Ronald Jones. Again, it's just about uncertainty. I'm not sure how he's going to be used yet. I have questions about his size. Now, I will say, of all the players that I'm selling at the moment, if he does hit, could be a value at $11. And I know there are some people out there that are very high on him. And I'm willing to admit that there is some potential that this could end up blowing up in my face. If he does win the outright RB1 job, and he shows that he's capable of doing a lot of different things as an NFL running back in this league, then I think he's going to have a successful season. Mainly because I don't think Peyton Barber is necessarily the hardest player to beat out, but I do like some of the things that Peyton Barber can do, and I think that we might be looking at more of a timeshare type thing coming at me. And if that's the case, then I don't see a lot of 3-down potential. And again, I'd rather take some of these other guys that are in this tier. So moving on to the next tier, just before we kind of list the names, these are the guys that you're going to be rounding out the rest of your running back group with, essentially. And ideally, I think you're going to want to roster some of these guys and not have to rely on them as starters. So in this tier 6, Guys like Tevin Coleman for $9, Marshawn Lynch for $8, Tariq Cohen for $7, Marlon Mack for $7, Rex Burkhead for $6, Aaron Jones for $5, and Kerryon Johnson for $5. Some guys I'm buying, Rex Burkhead, as I mentioned before, I think he can be the most reliable running back in New England. He missed 5 games last year, but he was still the RB16 in terms of fantasy points scored per game. I think with Dion Lewis being gone, Dion Lewis, I think he was around the RB19 in terms of fantasy points per game. There's a big void there. He scored over 200 plus fantasy points last year. I don't think you can just say, oh, Sony Michel's going to get that. I think Rex Burkhead is going to end up being used in a lot of the situations that Dion Lewis was used in as well and excelled in. I think he'll be used a lot in the red zone where Dion Lewis often got some looks. So I think there's a big potential for Burkhead especially at $6. I mean, this might be the only running back in this tier that I would feel good starting as an RB2. And for $6, I honestly believe that he still has some low-end RB1 upside potentially here. So I really like Rex Burkhead at that price. Kerryon Johnson's the other guy I like at $5. Very similar to what I talked about with guys like Rashad Penny and Royce Freeman. I actually believe that there is maybe not true workhorse or 3-down potential, but I think he could be used more than some people think he could be in all facets of the game. The offensive line looks like they're going to be improving. And yeah, the team throws a lot, but I think that they've thrown a lot in the past due to necessity. They've never really had any reliable running backs that could either stay healthy or that could pick up decent enough yardage where they didn't have to throw it all the time. So I think if they can actually improve this run game, this team might not have to throw as much. And I'm not really worried about LeGarrette Blount. I know that Theo Riddick probably does steal a lot of the third down duty, but even if Kerryon Johnson can carve out something there, then that's only going to help his value. In terms of just guys I'm avoiding, there isn't really anyone else in this tier that I would straight up avoid. So I don't really have a sell. Most of these other guys do interest me somewhat. Again, I would not want to have any of them as my RB2, maybe as a flex or as a bench option. That would be fine. Marlon Mack right now, he kind of looks like he could be the starting running back there. We're not sure. Hopefully we see more and we can figure this out a little bit more. Marshawn Lynch to me is intriguing. I don't think he was used near enough last year. Gruden seems to me kind of this old school coach. I wouldn't be surprised if he wants to run the ball a little bit more. So that would be good for Marshawn Lynch, obviously. Not a lot else on the depth chart either. So I think Lynch doesn't really have to worry too much about anyone else stealing tons and tons of carries from him. Tariq Cohen, I like his skill set. I do worry a little bit about the hype. Again, mainly there just seems to be a lot coming from the Bears. Cohen is maybe one of the players that's driving that hype. So I'd be cautious, maybe overpaying for him. Aaron Jones, I like. Obviously, he's got a suspension, though, so I need to get him for fairly cheap. $5 doesn't seem terrible. I think he's the most talented running back in that backfield. I will say that I'm a little bit skeptical of how the coaching staff is going to use all these guys. I feel like they're going to ride a hot hand, so I wouldn't fault anybody for just wanting to avoid the Green Bay running back situation altogether. And then there's Tevin Coleman. We know he's a talented runner. Obviously, the main knock on him is that he's behind Devontae Freeman. But he is playing for a contract next year, and Freeman was banged up a little bit last year. He had some concussions. If one of those he gets concussed again this year, who knows? He might end up missing significant time, unfortunately. But that would be good for Tevin Coleman owners. So he's a guy that I'm interested in at the right price. I wouldn't want to be spending over $10 to get him. After that, we kind of get into a cluster of running backs that are all $4 or less. The Duke Johnsons, Theo Riddicks, Carlos Hydes, Jamal Williams, CJ Andersons, James White, and Isaiah Crowell. Again, these are going to be the guys that you're going to throw on your bench for a flyer. Out of the group, I don't mind any of them, to be honest. Hyde, I'm a little bit skeptical of, mainly because of Nick Chubb being there. Not sure what they're going to be used or how they plan on using the rookie. And I mean, Duke Johnson's in this group as well. I think he's fairly safe. He should be used still a fair amount. So I don't mind Duke. I don't mind Theo Riddick to some extent. I think, like I said before, when talking about Kerryon Johnson, he should be used a lot on third down rolls. CJ Anderson, I don't mind if I can get him for, $2 or $3. I think he could get enough carries to be viable. And, hopefully you catch him on a week when he scores a touchdown. I do like James White this year. I would really hope to get him for $1. Just because I think that there's going to be a lot of instances where he is going to be used as this pass catching running back, which I think we'll see a fair amount. So when the situation calls for it and they spell Rex Burkhead, I think James White is going to be called on, and he probably is going to have a few pretty big games this year. I also like Isaiah Crowell right now. I'm not sure what the Jets have planned for their running backs, but I think Crowell looks to be the guy to get the most touches there. And at this price, $2 or $3, I don't mind getting a guy that projects to have quite a bit of volume. Jamal Williams may be a guy I'm avoiding, again, for a lot of the same reasons as Aaron Jones, and I just don't think he's as good as Aaron Jones. To me, he's just a guy that can do some things, but nothing spectacular, which is good for, once in a while, but I just don't think it bodes well for him to have long-term success this season. So that kind of wraps that up. If you want to go even deeper, I mean, we could list off a whole bunch of $1 running backs names, but if you go back to the last podcast I did for the subscribers, I outlined a bunch of $1 players where I looked at a handful of the running backs that fall into this range. So you can go back and listen to that. And here's some of the very cheap options that you might want to use as flyers at the very end of your roster. So that wraps up this whole exercise. Again, if you have any questions, auction related, hit me up on Twitter at SlimForMVP. If you have any questions at all about, tiering or how to run a draft, even, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. If you want to try and pick the brains of kind of the masses of auction drafters that are out there, you can tweet us at Fantasy Auction. We'll try and answer stuff there. Maybe throw a retweet out, and maybe we can get some kind of crowdsourcing to help you out with some of your answers. So with that being said, happy drafting. Go do a mock draft, and good luck.